let's begin, as is our custom, with 72 seconds silence to remember those who lost their lives. Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't believe there are any apologies for absence. Yeah, I'll cut some stuff. Oh, sorry. There's transfer of day. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the previous meeting. Can I sign them as a true and accurate record, please? Agreed. And then we come to the housing management performance. 41 and 42 reports. Welcome down, welcome to Joe. So in front of us, we have the first 6 months of the housing management performance data this financial year. And I think it's important to remember why it's here. We want to make sure that we're monitoring and tracking the performance of our housing management service at the highest level, especially in the light of the regulators' findings. So addressing the problems highlighted in the regulators' report really is a huge priority for all of us. And there is some welcome news on that in the report, section 12.1, which shows our non-decency rate now stands at 28%, which is a significant drop, because it was at 33% at the beginning of the year. So Dan, do you want to start by talking a bit about that, and then I'll open for questions.
And Coach, I might want to comment on some of the details too. It's worth saying that I mean, you're absolutely right that that's welcome and that it's heading in the right direction. It's probably important to say that is, it's quite a large jump in quite a short space of time, which is not completely attributable, as it were, to actual work in people's homes. But there is progress being made on that front too. But it represents progress, if you like, in the other area where we had a failing in the judgment, which is about our knowledge of the stock. It's partly about the improvement of the quality of the data that we've got. And thankfully, as the stock condition survey information gets better and better, it's helping to move the numbers in the right direction. It could of course be moving the numbers in the wrong direction, but as it happens, it's moving in the right direction, which is really positive for us. But that doesn't hide the fact that trajectory can only continue in that direction if we crack on with the data improvement will continue, but the real progress has to be in getting the work done in people's homes. We are now on that track, but as we made clear in our response when the judgment was published, we still think 2030 is the realistic target to get to full decency.
Thank you. Questions, comments, or Johnny?
So my question was about ASP in section 8. It says that resident satisfaction with the service remains low. Obviously, it's a really important issue. What further assurance can we give, in addition to the paper, that this really being looked at and that we're trying to protect our tenants and leaseholders who might be really badly affected by it?
I think just jump in there as well, because I know that you've been working really closely with the community safety team and the police, and in particular in World's End. So I think this is really disappointing, actually.
Yeah. So we have employed an additional ASB officer to support with the work that has been occurring to try and prevent ASB. We are also trying to ramp up any specific litigation that we need to take against people like and that sort of antisocial behaviour. It's quite challenging because there has been some issues in relation to staff safety with some residents, and we're trying to take action on that front. I think that it is in terms of trying to successfully move things forward, it is the team has a plan. We've had to deal with some of the staffing issues around the safety, which is as well as resident safety is a big paramount importance. But things are moving. There has been some delays with some court cases as well. But generally, in terms of trying to provide additional assurance, I think that is probably a three-pronged approach there. So we've got the community safety and the police angle. We've got the staff safety angle, and then we've also got the resident safety angle. We are trying to triangulate those things and move things forward, but it is a bit of a challenging area. There has been some successes, but it definitely needs to improve. And I'll be working with the new director of housing management to try and move that forward. There are, in terms of housing needs, which is not substantive priority, there are some challenges that we've got with some of those residents who are in some of our units across the borough as well. So I'll definitely work with the director of housing management to try and move them.
It's worth also adding that there's you've got in front of you two different bits of data about the satisfaction of the ASB. So there's that page which is dedicated to the topic where the part of the issue you can see is that the amount of data is very small. So what we're looking at is one of the issues that we've got is that the sample size is so small because we have a real issue with getting. This is what happened. This is the data which shows that when someone has made a complaint about ASB, they then get followed up with a specific set of questions about our handling of their case. But there is also, if you go on page 10 of the data pack under the TSM, the Tenant Satisfaction Survey measures, there are 12 measures there, and the 12th one of those. So that's a questionnaire which is sent out to every resident, not just people who report to ASB, but every resident in the borough, as we're required to do on this standard set of measures. And TP12, as you can see there, was about satisfaction with RBKC's approach to handling ASB, and that's across all of our residents, and actually is showing that in terms of benchmarking against other landlords, we're in the top quartile. So I'm not sitting here telling you to believe one figure and not the other, but clearly what we need to do is figure out how we reconcile those numbers to try and build a real picture of what's going on. Because it looks like population satisfaction is actually okay. But for some reason, people who are actually dealing with cases in real time either don't want to fill in the survey, or when they do fill in the survey, aren't happy. And I think we need to figure out how we get the right story and act in the right ways on the basis of that.
Can I just pick, says it's sort of relevant actually because it's the line above. So new domestic abuse cases annually. When there's suddenly March 25, 70, which is such an outlier. But I mean, what was going on there? And then when you look down at the satisfied handling of cases, satisfied outcome case 12, I mean, that's a very odd number. So antisocial behaviour, safeguarding and domestic abuse. So under annual, new domestic abuse cases. And again, slightly to what you've just been saying, if you look at the top and the numbers are tiny, 343, and then there you've suddenly got 70.
Yeah. And that was last year, wasn't it? That was in March 25.
And then you somehow got them down to 70. So I mean, it was a bit of like, is it because it's connected to? I mean, it must be some is connected to antisocial behaviour with being domestic abuse too. But it just seemed an odd thing. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. Have you had any explanation of what was going on there, or how you managed to get it under control or changed it so quickly?
I'm not fully sure.
I think we might need to take that away. It's a really good question. Yeah. Oh, yes, because you're right. If we're succeeding in something, or if we've succeeded in something over the last year, it's important that we know how we've done that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's two questions. First of all, we only had 2 subletting rules. I think that's a fair reflection of our portfolio. I always think that the differential between a social rent and a subletting rent in this borough is probably the biggest anywhere in the country. So I just wondered if you think that's a representative only for 2 in the period.
I suspect that is more just a function of the cases which came to fruition in that period, if you see what I mean. But the pipeline of live investigations will be much bigger.
Okay.
And my kind of assessment of it is the same as yours, is that actually the kind of the real rate of fraud is probably a bit higher, but because of the amount of work that's involved in bringing a case from a kind of first tip off or suspicion, if you like, to actual kind of conclusion of the case, which of course might happen long in court, is a long period, which means it's going to be a little bit longer in terms of cases that are resolved. So the short answer to your question is, I think that's hiding a bigger picture probably, but it won't always be an even outturn.
And then my second question was on your complaints, is that response times have rather dropped quite dramatically during the period. And although it's a little tick up in September, hopefully that's a trend going the other way. Is there any explanation?
Well, this is a bit like the ASB answer, I think, in that it's partly about the data and partly about as it were. So I absolutely think that we've got some work to do in the service to sustain. It's one of those areas where management puts some attention and some focus, and staff respond to it. But unless you can sustain that, it's always at risk of dropping off a bit. And I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing here. I think the other issue, which is for us to sort out, and it's slightly hinted at in commentary, is that there's a mismatch, which is just a kind of a fact of the world we operate in, between the expectations of the housing ombudsman in terms of timeliness of responding to complaints and the expectations of the local government ombudsman, which is the measure that's used in our corporate complaints system. So I think I'm right in saying that the housing team is used to working under the housing ombudsman's code, because that's the code that actually governs their work. And by that measure, these numbers are closer to 85% or 80%. But the system that produces this data measures against the local government ombudsman. Now, that's an explanation of sorts. But the point is, if we were moving at a kind of with the efficiency and effectiveness that we want to, that difference of a few days shouldn't be this big. If you see what I mean, we should be dealing with more earlier. So I'm certainly not sitting here saying, "Oh, don't worry, that problem goes away if you just look at it in a different way," because I think there's something that we probably do need to look at from a management point of view. But we have set ourselves a challenge, and we're working closely with Marguerite and the corporate team on this to figure out a way of bringing you kind of data which kind of is which kind of lines up with the way that the best makes a better job of lining up the corporate expectation with the ombudsman expectation. That's what we're supposed to do.
And on an operational level, we are trying to focus on some. It's not as though Dan's right in relation to the data, not necessarily aligning with corporate. However, there are some operational issues within the service that we're trying to resolve as well. And then there are some cases whereby they've gone through stage 1, they've gone through stage 2, and another issue appears, and then it's another complaint that's been raised, and then they're linking it to the previous issue, and that's causing some delays. But again, that's not an excuse. That's something that as a team we need to address.
Any other questions or comments? Mary, anything from you? Linda? No? Thank you. Okay. Can I just say one thing? Dan, I'm conscious that I know this is your last leadership team meeting, but it is your last quarterly report
That might be true. Yeah.
that you're presenting. So in some fashion, I just want to thank you for the work you've done.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I mean, it'll be the last one of these. I remember my last thing.
Well, what a great one to have the last one, because if you look at all the figures there, the trajectory has been up year after year after year on all these things.
I have the privilege of working with an amazing team.
Yeah, well done, Dan. Thank you very much. Okay, sorry, anyone else? So recommendations, could we agree the recommendations in paragraph 2?
Three.
Yes. And now is to the medium term financial licensing. Johnny, I'm just going to hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you to Andrew, Bo, Fiona, all of the officers that have done a lot of work on this, and also to James, who kind of got the ball rolling a few months ago, and to our chairman of licensing. This is a statutory policy that we do need to refresh every few years, so it's normal and right that we look at how the world's changed over the past 5 years or so, and try to ensure we have the right balance in terms of our policies, because a lot of it is a balance, and with licensing, you're always trying to walk that tightrope between residential amenity and also supporting a really vibrant, fun local economy, which I think a lot of people really do appreciate. Since our last policy, we've gone through COVID, so quite a lot has happened, and that ushered in this newer era of summertime terraces and outdoor dining, which has been a big plus for the borough in lots of respects, and kind of in tandem with a lot of our amazing spaces has made the Kensington and Chelsea much more kind of fun, and has enhanced our claim to be the 21st arrondissement in Paris. But the statement of licensing policy has lots of commentary, not only on that kind of fun side of things, but also on the need for there to be proper management and effective enforcement, where there is a minority, where there might be a minority of premises who aren't quite getting it right. So I think that's really important to stress, as is the retention of the midnight policy, and our approach that outside terraces should be, generally speaking, closing at 10 o'clock. So hopefully we've got the balance right. I'm obviously looking forward to questions and comments from people here tonight. But yeah, a big thank you to the team for doing that work.
Kim.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's all about the balance, isn't it? So, I mean, there's a reference in here. You had 17 responses, and you made appropriate changes. You can give me just highlight some of the appropriate changes that you have made as a result of the responses. And as I said, like Johnny said, I think personally, the policy in terms of 10 o'clock terraces, etc., is a good one, and closing hours. But I just want to give a sense of how you're going to approach this balance.
So Appendix 2 lists all the summary of comments and whether or not they were relevant to the policy, because about 2/3 weren't actually something we can deal with under the policy. And the third, where they were relevant, whether or not we revised the policy. And then we explain how we have revised the policy. So there's some things we were asked to change and we couldn't. Some things we were asked to change and we have. So what's an example is that the closing at midnight doesn't mean closing at midnight. There has to be the time for the venue to disperse, if you like. So there's some changes we've made, nuances here, or to clarify some items. We've clarified about how Martin's Law applies to there's a legislation we've reflected in the policy, but to point out that it's not something we deal with under the policy, but signposted to where people can influence that. So it's more nothing's fundamentally changed following consultation. So a document that we drafted was well received. So 72 responses from a widespread public consultation was reasonable in how many people engaged, and of course there were quite a few supports, which are also commented in Appendix 2. So fundamentally, there are no major changes following consultation.
I was just going to highlight that it's great that you've got the new section on welfare and vulnerability that you have added into it. So that is a sort of new thing. And the modular and safe haven for both customers and for the staff working there. So, I mean, we put it in here, but do we actually check it, or do you see its work? How do you monitor that's having put something like that here, that all the pubs and whatever are actually going to undertake doing this.
Can I jump in again? This came up at community safety because we were made aware that a lot of the pubs weren't training their staff on Ask Ange. So the community safety team have been working with licensing to bring this, put more focus on it. And I think they're now bringing it in for any new licenses or variations. And again, the modern slavery, because it's such an important area. And we're coming up to Christmas, and again, you're concerned about drinks being spiked. That's something else we're thinking about, whether we could do some comms around that. But it's thank you for including. I think it's really, really good.
Yes,
Sorry, I cut you off.
so we do have licensing enforcement officers. Obviously, they respond to their data net. We don't go trawling premises looking for problems. And we get a lot of feedback from users and from licensees and from customers and patrons asking us to investigate, and we do. And so the Ask Angela is a great example of where we were unaware the degree to which it was publicised, that there were many venues that weren't applying it. So we went through an education through all our premises to explain, to re-explain that they had undertaken to do this for. It was just a turnover of staff in their premises, and sometimes they forget to have it on their induction.
Comments? Yeah. Mary, anything from the OSC? And I can see you have your hand up.
Yes, I mean, I found recently on the licensing policy review, and one of the issues that I raised was the concept of a cumulative impact zone in Earls Court. If you look at, I think it's 0.64 kilometres, you have 22 licensed premises, 27 businesses that rely on bike deliveries. We've got the 2 betting shops, we've got the 2 adult gaming shops. And when actually you look at the figures, you've only got 3 retail stores on Earls Court Road. So this was one of the things that came out of the Earls Court call to action in the 2022, was an acknowledgement of saturation and the concept of saturation. And I do think that we need to think quite seriously, because recently I was on a licensing committee where one side of the road was in Westminster, and they have a very strong view about saturation of particular businesses. And on the south side, we're in RBKC, and the solicitor on the way out said, you're going to have to watch it, because you're not going to, businesses that can't get licenses in Soho or Mayfair will just move over. But the fact is we don't have the control. We don't have the enforcement facilities, and it is destabilising some of our high streets.
What's your question?
So I'm asking whether or not this could be considered.
Can
it may
not
be implemented immediately, but I think it's something that you have to consider because of how it's impacting high streets and how residents,
So I
as a
think
result,
it's
are
a very
avoiding
fair question.
high streets.
Some of the issues you raised around gambling would be covered under this policy.
No, but I'm just saying the overall profile of the street
Yes.
is no longer resident friendly. So if residents don't want to use and change their behaviour as to how they approach their high street, it actually means that you get far less people reporting problems.
Yes, but you could, so for cumulative impact zones, there aren't currently cumulative impact zones for gambling. So this policy just deals with alcohol sales.
No, because we've got 22 licensed premises in 0.64 kilometres.
I understand, and like I was saying, and I empathise as well. But just to be clear, there aren't cumulative impact zones available for gambling premises. That's something that's being considered by the government, but hasn't yet been brought in. With respect to the scope of this licensing policy, as you're aware, RBKC doesn't have cumulative impact zones in place. In order to put them in place, we need significant evidence to suggest they're required. Absolutely, of course, we continue to review kind of evidence and statistics. And if it reached a point where we felt we could support them, then we would consider it. At the moment, we're not in that position. We definitely could look at the data and come back to you. However, we did do that as part of the response, and at this point, we don't feel there's justification. Is that correct, Andrew?
It is, and it isn't about the premises, it's about the consequences of what people, of how it affects people. And it's not the density of premises, it affects crime, it's the statistics on antisocial behaviour, it's alcohol, it's alcoholism, there's these things, and the borough in our EQIA will explain how the borough has extraordinarily good statistics for alcoholism. And so the evidence isn't there to support at the CIZ in this borough.
But of course, if that changed, we absolutely would consider it, and that's licensing committee. Absolutely.
Because we're anticipating at least 5 more applications for licensing within that stretch. And we are anticipating, for example, the co-op going 24/7, which will not only be alcohol, but it will also be bike dependent.
I think what the officer is saying is that they can't do anything about it yet, but when everything's in, if there's enough evidence, then they would consider it. So the answer is no, they can't consider it now. That they could in future if the evidence was sufficient.
Yes, and it's not about density of premises. It's
about all the behaviour surrounding it.
No, but the point is, if it is affecting residents changing their behaviour pattern, so one, they're not using the high street, they're actually using alternative routes to avoid. This is actually that you won't get the evidence and you don't have the enforcement.
I appreciate exactly what you're saying, but I'm not sure at the moment.
I think I'd be really keen to make sure that all the councils ask residents who complain to them to report any crime.
Report it,
to use that information to support any decisions we make in those areas.
Yeah.
But I do empathise, and I know I was caught, but we do attend meetings and we had screening committee here around concerns residents have raised. We have the PSPO, we have the Borough-wide street drinking PSPO, and we do understand and accept there's work to do there, and we really want to work with you to resolve that. But it's not about the kind of density or the amount of premises, it's about the impacts. At the moment, we haven't got the evidence. I've just asked you if you work with us.
I'm just putting to you, when I did the knocking on doors to door for the Admiral licensing, in that block, there was only one flat that was actually people living there. The rest of them were all had become Airbnb. And when I spoke to the person, they said it's really difficult late at night to get in and out. So I think if you're changing how people use a place, how are you going to get the evidence and what evidence do you require in order
I think with that sort of detail would probably be better off outside this meeting.
Yes, okay.
Take back now, but broadly they can't do it now, but prepared to look at it in the future. We'll give you details of what evidence you need to.
I look forward to the details.
Thank you. Could we please look at the recommendations in paragraph 221, which is to consider it and recommend it to full council.
Agreed.
Okay. This is agenda item 6, which is immediately from financial planning. Lisa. I just wanted to. Okay, well, I think this is the first time, at least since I've been leading, that we're entering our budget consultation with such a significant gap of £5.4 million. I mean, quite extraordinary, and it highlights the huge and unprecedented financial challenge the government's fair funding formula funding review has put this council under. And when you look at the papers, you just see how stark it is. It's full of difficult proposals, things that we would never have wanted to do. The council tax reduction scheme, the second home tax, 5% council tax raise. And yet, even with all these things that we're considering, we still haven't closed the budget gap. So I would like to say I really encourage all our residents to take part in the consultation and tell us what services are really important to them and where you think there's space to do things better. But I just think I have to be really clear tonight. There are really tough and difficult decisions ahead. And my message tonight is loud and clear to the government and to our members of parliament. Your fairer funding formula will make our residents poorer. That's what it's going to do. And we will do what we have to do, and we will balance the budget in the fairest way we can. But, members of parliament, if you really want to help protect our most vulnerable residents, then you need to rethink fairer funding. But that's what I'd just like to say as an introduction. And Jen, you probably want to add things.
Thank you. I mean, I'll start really by thanking officers that are here and those that aren't tonight, because they've had to make plans and then see all of those plans literally torn up by the government's funding review, being lumbered with an £83 million additional saving to make on top of the over 50 million that we were looking to have to make over this 4-year period is no easy feat. I'm incredibly impressed that we've been able to close it to within 5 million, which is a huge number, but it is far more achievable than the number we started with at the beginning of this cycle. The reality is, as it says, that we are having to make incredibly unpalatable decisions. We also have to recognise that there is even more responsibility handed down from central government onto local authorities. So they're cutting our budgets whilst at the same time telling us to do more, and to do it to ever more increasing ombudsman, more regulation, more rules, more sort of intervention from central office with less money. So I'm really echo Elizabeth's comments about what our parliamentarians are doing. I find it absolutely astonishing that they are sort of celebrating £200,000 that was given to us as a household top-up fund for homelessness, whilst at the same time seeing 83 million being taken out of our budget. So they may come back once we've had a bit of an update on the settlement in a couple of weeks, but we've effectively had to do this blind. We have one of the latest budget setting periods in government history at the end of November, and we won't get the local government settlement until late December. So we really are having to sort of feel around in the dark as to what's deliverable, because it's not just putting numbers down on a piece of paper. These are jobs, services, things our residents use and rely on that we're having to consult on perhaps ending. So we really do need that certainty from government, and we need them to rethink their whole approach to effectively starving central London of funding simply to cover black holes elsewhere. But thank you again.
Any specific questions or comments? Johnny?
Yeah, so obviously fair funding is the spectre that's haunting this draft budget. Is there anything that we've heard since the paper was drafted that might give us any comfort? Have our MPs given any kind of statement? Is there anything that suggests that we can mitigate some of the worst of these impacts? Would be my first question. I was going to come on to one or two points in the paper.
So we've heard nothing concrete, but we are hearing that they're looking at formula, particularly around housing and children's, and that may be beneficial for us. We believe the policy statement is going to be next Thursday, and obviously the budget is on the 26th. But since this paper was written, we haven't actually received anything that I could say is definite. It's all still uncertain at this point in time.
Yeah, so still nothing concrete, only hearsay, which the government seems to do well. In terms of the paper, obviously very difficult decisions throughout, but I just wanted to welcome the enhancement of our clean streets work. So more street sweeping, more graffiti busting, more buggies, things that our residents really care about. When we go and knock on doors, clean streets is probably the number one thing that residents raise with us. And we are listening in this room when we go and knock on doors, and we're looking at how we can improve our services, especially the ones that people care about the most. So it's really good news. I hope over the coming months, residents will see the difference with some of this coming in over the next few months. These should be the cleanest streets in London, and hopefully this gets us closer to that. If we aren't there already, I think we probably are.
Any other comments? I mean, we've been through this. Mary, anything from
No,
you?
nothing
No?
else for me. See you all again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. As I said, it's just extraordinary going out to consultation when we got a gap. It's completely unheard of. Oh, I do hope our residents to come back and respond.
Apologies, we are planning to bring another update in January ahead of the February budget report, where so you can tell you what's coming from the draft settlement of the budget. We'll also do on the day or very early the next morning briefings for you.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, could we please agree the recommendations in paragraph 2 then? Thank you. And then the final page is about the household support funds. So, Jen, over to you.
Thank you. This is somewhat more positive news. Yes. So set up by the last Conservative administration, it was a way of getting money out during COVID for those most vulnerable. It is obviously rolled on now into its 7th tranche. We're proposing to continue our free school meal approach in the holidays, but also looking at using really accurate data, give £200 to the 30% of people that are most vulnerable and need the support the most. Given what we've just heard in the previous paper, that's going to go a long way to mitigating the harm of the Labour government's proposals. But we know it's only a one-off. This money is not yet secured going forwards. We really do believe that money is best used in people's own pockets rather than set centrally. And so we'll continue to make sure that we allocate it as best we can and give people as much agency and independence with the funding as possible. But
John, then Josh.
Yeah, it's a bit unusual for a 7th tranche without something being mainstreamed. So I guess my first question was, do we anticipate an 8th tranche and what's the future for this fund?
Yeah.
And then my second question was just about how we selected the cohort and what kind of got us to when we think this is really the right way to target it. It's great that we're able to support people, but 30% might feel a bit arbitrary to some people. So talk a bit more about the rationale.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Fadzi. And I think on the first point, so the government has confirmed that the Household Support Fund won't continue beyond March 2026. They are replacing it with what they're calling a Crisis Resilience Fund. Conversations have been ongoing over the last kind of 6 months about exactly what that looks like, what it's for. I think the criteria are likely to be different, but we still don't know exactly what that will look like and therefore kind of how it can be used and what difference it will make. I think we should have more detailed guidance from the government in January, which will set out how that funding can and can't be used. But we also know that they are looking at a whole range of funding. I think come January, it will be time for us to look at how we're able to use that and how we're able to look across the system at what we provide to households in low incomes. On the selection of the cohort, so in previous years, we have made a smaller payment to all households on the low income family tracker, so as many as 16,000. And we had a slightly smaller allocation from the government this year, so we need to make decisions about how to spend that money. But the conversations that we had suggested that it would be better to target a smaller cohort who need the money more. This cohort is a definition that Lyft use, which takes into account people's actual income as reported and takes into account average national fuel costs. So it's people who fall into relative poverty once those costs are taken into account. I think that allows us to, you're right, I think that it is always difficult to pick a cut-off, but I think this allows us to have confidence that we are targeting those who need this additional support the most, and it allows us to make a bigger payment, which hopefully is more meaningful to people in that position.
Thank you. Sorry, Josh, I didn't know whether you had a question
that's fine.
or not.
No, I was
thought you had your hand up.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. Sure, thank you. I was wondering, obviously we track low incomes. Obviously we've got the Lyft tracker as well. Are we expecting this to increase potentially with new taxation being proposed, both unfortunately locally and also nationally? Because the amount of money that the Chancellor has currently said that she needs to raise will impact all of us, not let alone just people who need it. Are we going to expect a shift to see more people potentially getting into difficulty that we may need to offer some support to if we can in future years?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. We monitor the Lift dashboard on a monthly basis, so we can see in real time how some of those numbers are changing. And I think we will have to keep an eye both on people's taxation burden, but also on wider cost of living pressures. There has been quite a lot of change. Those numbers on Lift have been going down, but sometimes they spike up again for various reasons. So I think we'll need to continue to keep a close eye on the numbers and understand what that means for people's actual circumstances. Lift is partly reliant on the council data, so the other bit of this is making sure that everybody is accessing the full range of support we do offer, including the council tax reduction scheme and other benefits that people can access. So I think it's a watching brief, and both in light of the broader economic climate and the specific decisions that the government makes.
Any other questions or comments? How you are, but you came to absolutely no more questions. Thank you, Mary. Anything from you? No. Can we then please accept the recommendations in paragraph 2? Very much. And if there are no more business, is there any other business? No. And close meeting.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Oh, yes, yeah, should have like the ones here. Yes.